I once was blind, but now I see. It's the famous line from one of the most famous hymns, Amazing Grace, and it comes straight from John chapter 9. My name is Nate Carter, and welcome to today's Cornerstone Connection Daily Devotional. And it's interesting, I wonder if this is the only place in the New Testament where an entire chapter is devoted to one person's healing, one interaction with Jesus. Usually it's just a paragraph or a couple of verses, and someone gets healed, and Jesus has something to say, and there's a little bit of an interaction. But this one, John devotes a whole chapter to this man's healing. And I think that's because there's so much in there. Now, we're at the second half of the chapter, beginning with verse 24 today, and we start to see some really interesting things where the blindness that this man has encountered leads to an entire discussion about the metaphor of spiritual blindness and spiritual sight. Now, it begins with the Pharisees interrogating the man and saying, the man that was blind and can now see. And they say, you know what, God should get the glory for this because we know that this man, Jesus, is a sinner. In other words, Jesus can't be the Messiah. Jesus can't be a healer that is the Messiah because we claim to know that Jesus is a sinner. Why? Because Jesus was healing on the Sabbath. Pretty thin argument, if you ask me, but they're sticking by it. And as you know through the New Testament, they stick pretty to their guns on that one. And the man replies, I don't know whether he is a sinner, but I know this, and here it is. I was blind, but now I can see. And it's interesting, then these Pharisees, they're just like a dog on a bone. They will not they refuse to even consider the fact that Jesus could be the Messiah. And it even goes to the point where in verse 28, it says, then they cursed him. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine a spiritual leader, someone that you respect, someone who's supposed to really represent God's ideals, cursing you? You can imagine the words that they might have used. I mean, it's abhorrent, it's disgusting, and yet they are so adamant about the fact that Jesus cannot be the Messiah that they're willing to even compromise their own values while at the same time they're accusing Jesus of doing something that's against their law. Meanwhile, they're breaking their own law by cursing this man. Skip down to verse 35. When Jesus heard what had happened, he found the man that was born blind, that he healed, and he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? And the man answered, who is he, sir? I want to believe in him. What I noticed that was interesting here is that even though this man had been healed, his full understanding of the Messiah, his full understanding of the gospel had not yet happened. And I think this can be true in our lives as well, that we can encounter God and encounter something that He's done in our lives, but yet not fully understand the ramifications of the truth behind it. Or perhaps you know someone who has had something really significant happen in their life, and you're certain that it's God who has done it in their life. But they do not yet know the full gospel story. And I think that can be often the case, that something, the beginning, the first seed has been planted, but they need someone to continue to tell them the story, to bring them along in their faith so that they can trust Jesus for who he is. Now, I love, to me, this is the high point of the whole chapter, this next verse. Jesus says, you have seen him. You have seen him. You get it? You have seen him. The very eyes that I just healed have now seen the Messiah. They have seen the Son of Man, and he is speaking to you. And then it happens. This man who was born blind could now see, and then Jesus connected the dots. He says, yes, Lord, I believe. And then he worshiped Jesus. And Jesus told him, I entered this world to render judgment, to give sight to the blind, and to show those who think they see that they are in fact blind. And some Pharisees who were standing nearby heard him and asked, are you saying we're blind? Listen to this. Jesus says, if you were blind, you wouldn't be guilty, but you remain guilty because you claim you can see. You see, the Pharisees, their eyes work perfectly well. Jesus is standing before them. He is making himself known as the Messiah, and yet they refuse to allow their eyes to see what is plainly before them. If they had been blind, like this blind man was, then they wouldn't have any guilt because their eyes didn't work, but rather their eyes can see plainly the, the Messiah standing before them, and they refuse to believe. So we see in this whole chapter a metaphor for spiritual sight, that Jesus opens the eyes of those who are blind in order to allow them to see, but yet it still remains within our choice to decide to allow our eyes to see what is right before us. May we choose to stand before Jesus and see him for who he is, and then, like the blind man, testify that we were once blind, but now we see, and worship Jesus who is before us. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you next time on the Cornerstone Connection.